Gloria Steinem has spent decades on the road, traveling across the world as a leader and spokesperson for the feminist movement. She's now funneling those stories into a new book, her first in 20 years, called My Life on the Road. I had a chance to chat with Steinem when she was in Toronto earlier this week. You are very much your father's daughter, and you say that, and you realize that, and you openly write about that, and it's because of the travel and the nomadic lifestyle that you had as a kid. Tell us about that.
You know how you think you're rebelling against something and then you discover that you've repeated your own version of it in later life? That was true for me because my first 10 years were mostly spent in a house trailer, as my father had a little summer resort in Michigan, and in the wintertime, as soon as it got cold, we would get in the house trailer, me, my sister, the dog, and my mother, and he would kind of work his way to Florida or California, where it was warm, by buying and selling small antiques and jewelry along the way. So because of my age, I just didn't go to school, and my sister would go to high school once we got there. And I, of course, wanted to be like the other kids, as we all do. It never dawned on me that the other kids might envy me, you know. And also because I rebelled against that as an idea, I thought I was establishing a home or trying to, or I thought I was going to get married and have kids and have a conventional life like everybody else. It took me a long time to realize that I had replicated it in my own way. And it's familiar, it feels like home. And I'm grateful to my father because for so many things. I mean, for making me secure with insecurity, which is really good for a freelance writer.
Comes in handy.
If you never have a job.
Yeah.
For introducing me to the road, for being a kind, gentle, funny man who loved my company. So it made me realize such men existed. And I didn't, as you know, women who have distant, cold, or even violent fathers don't know that, and you know, often end up repeating that because that seems like all there is. So I'm grateful to him.
There's a story in here that further kind of exemplifies what you're saying about your dad, and I call it the dessert story, where you're at a friend's house. She's meant to eat all of her dinner, she can't have dessert, and then you came home and you tried it out on your dad to see what he'd do.
I was appalled because she was my best girlfriend and she couldn't have her dessert until she ate all her dinner. I had never seen that before. So when I came home, I said to my father, who we were eating in the living room as usual, schlepping out to get stuff in the kitchen. We never sat at the table. He said, "Do you want dessert?" I said, "I haven't eaten all my main course," to test him. He said, "It's okay, sometimes you're hungry for one thing and not for another." I so loved him at that moment. I wish I had told him I loved him at that moment.
There's something that struck me in this, and you wrote, and of course this was in the 50s, but you said that in the movies that you saw, and you saw a lot of movies as a family, that marriage was always a happy end. It wasn't a beginning.
It was never the beginning.
It was never the beginning, and you saw that in your mom and learned a lot about your mom, who was really an amazing journalist, but that was cut short. Tell us a little bit about your mom, the conversations you did have, and how you learned to discover who she was.
I didn't discover it until I was in my late teens, because this was all before I was born. She was a newspaper reporter, very pioneering, very talented. She had my sister, who, and by then my sister was about 6. My father was always this wonderful, charming, kind-hearted guy, but utterly irresponsible, always borrowing money and, you know, having to park his car far away so the finance company didn't come and take it and so on. And she was trying to lead this intense career that she loved, and I think also she had fallen in love with a man in the newspaper office, and she, you know, felt that was not right. She couldn't do that. So she ended up having what was in those days called a nervous breakdown, and and she was, you know, gone in a sanatorium for a couple of years, and that caused her to just make a choice and give up everything she loved and go with my father to start this little summer resort in southern Michigan. And it broke her spirit. It really broke her spirit. And she also became hooked on an early form of tranquilizer, sodium pentothal, which, you know, is quite, slurs your speech. I mean, it's quite awful. And you know, so she was sometimes okay and often not by the time I knew her. It took me a long time to realize who she really was.
In 1963, the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and you found yourself with a mother and daughter, and that mother, Mrs. Green, had a lot to say.
Yes, she, you know, there was no, to my knowledge, women's movement at that moment in time in 1963. I'm sure there were people doing things, but I didn't know it. And she had a consciousness that was so far ahead of mine, because I'm just accepting whatever is there, you know, totally knocked out. And she's saying, where are the women? You know, where's Fannie Lou Hamer? Where, you know,
on stage.
On stage. Why are there no, you know, women are the heart and soul of, as much as men, of the civil rights movement. Where are they? And, you know, I'm so grateful to her, because it was my glimmer of beginning of consciousness. And actually, it is also true in the States, that even statistically true in public opinion polls, that African-American women were way more the inventors of the women's movement than European-American or white women, or however you want to designate. And yet it's often portrayed as the other way around.
Which is interesting in itself.
Right.
Another story came out of that day about Malcolm X, and you befriended his daughter, and she shared something with you. Share it with
and
us.
this was just in the last few months.
Yeah.
You know, because we'd known each other for a while, but she came to see me for tea, and I was writing that part about the march. And so she told me the story of her father, Malcolm X, who had gone to Washington and to express his support, to show his support for the march, for Martin Luther King's march. He was staying in Ossie Davis's hotel room, but he knew that if he appeared, that it would be divisive and controversial. I mean, we forget about it now, but that march was already controversial, because the idea was that it would dissolve in violence, or that it would impede instead of aid the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So it, you know, it already was controversial. So, but the fact, I was so moved by it, that he was there in support and not coming, you know, not showing, not speaking in public. And, you know, why don't we know that? You know, because everything is about the conflict between, or much anyway, the conflict between the two, when of course they had a shared purpose. They had different styles and tactics. I understand that. But I don't know, I was very moved by that. So it's part of what's interesting about writing a book. You keep learning, even when you think you know.
Can you tell me why you think that the United States of America was ready for an African-American male president before a woman?
Well, here's my theory. We are all raised, or mostly raised, women and men of all races, ethnicities, by women. And so we associate female authority and power with childhood. And I think that that is especially true for some men. I mean, you know, you could, it's the only possible explanation for some crazy people in the media who, big grown-up guys who were saying, I cross my legs whenever I see Hillary Clinton, and she reminds me of my first wife outside alimony court, hello? And the only reason she was elected to the Senate was sympathy because her husband had an affair. I mean, just, they were saying the most outrageous things. And I think actually the sight of a very powerful woman made them feel regressed to childhood, because the last time they saw one, they were 8. You know, so I think that is kind of universal and deep, and race is absolutely universal and deep. But in a family sense, you know, we experience female authority in childhood and associate it with childhood. Now, I hope and believe by now there have been enough women, diverse women, in public authority, so maybe it won't be true again. But it's going to be very difficult, very difficult.
Gloria, keep traveling, keep teaching us, please. What a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for chatting.
Thank you.
I could have talked with Ms. Steinem all day long. You will find our extended interview with Ms. Steinem on our website.